Letters from a boy in boarding school, writing home to father, playing it cool. Boxing kingdoms in his childhood mind, animal adventures of a different kind. Oxford Towers calling through the rain, a surf upon his shoulder, sharing in the pain. Man and machine in tandem flow, past and future, together we know. Read on through every page, from 1906 to 26, every stage. Robot lady's voice so clear and bold, analysis silver, wisdom gold. Through the letters, through the diary, learning who he was, who he would be. Trenches in the darkness, wounded in the war, a vow made in Bristol he could not ignore. Mrs. Moore is waiting, Paddy's gone away. Spirits held in bondage, words he had to say. Philosophy at Oxford, an atheist writes home. Dymer dreaming, never quite all alone. Deep across the digital sea, chronicles unfold for you and me. Read on through every page, from 1906 to 26, every stage. A robot lady's voice so clear and bold, analysis silver, wisdom gold. Through the letter, through the diary, learning who he was, who he would be. Warnie and his father, and Lily at the door. Walter Hooper's pages always wanting more. Blair is on his quest, Milton in his head. Every word he ever wrote, everything he said. From the start until the end, magic tales we comprehend. Man and machine together guide the way, reading through the pages, come might may.
All right. Hi, I'm Jeff, and this is my read on C.S. Lewis, where we learn about him together through everything that he wrote in the order that he wrote it. I'm joined today by my co-host, Robot Lady. Robot Lady, it's good to see you. In this episode, Lewis is 28 years old. He is a fellow at Magdelan College within the University of Oxford College system. He is serving a 5-year post that he was elected to as tutor in English language and literature. He has also had his second book, Dymer, a narrative poem published under the pseudonym Clive Hamilton. Hamilton, of course, being his mother's maiden name. We've been following Lewis's journey up to this point through his letters to friends and family, his early literary works, like the poem that I just mentioned, and his diary entries from 1922 to early 1927. We covered his diary entries that he was keeping of his daily life at the request of Mrs. Moore, his deceased friend Paddy Moore's mother. And so we find ourselves today in the year 1927, in August to be precise. A letter to his father is what we finished the last episode with, and we're going to start this episode with another letter to his father. Robot Lady, how are you doing today? And are you ready to jump into the next letter with me to see what we can dig up?
Absolutely, Jeff. I'm doing great, and I'm excited to dive into this next letter with you. It's always fascinating to follow Lewis's journey, especially as we get into 1927. So let's get started and see what new insights we can uncover today.
All right, it's to his father, dated August 12th, 1927. He says, "My dear P, so sorry, I find I forgot to send the enclosed with my last letter." Enclosed is, of course, code for payment. I am back from Cambridge, where I had the usual unwholesome combination of high living. We were fed splendidly, both food and drink being free, and sedentary occupation. Just really quickly, one last thing to say about that quote, the enclosed. I don't know what he's paying his father for, if he's paying him back for something or to help with medical expenses. I honestly can't remember if this is ever addressed in the prior letter, Robot Lady, but I just wanted to add that point. Do you have anything you want to say before I continue?
Absolutely. That's a great observation. It's true that the details about what he's paying his father for can be a bit vague or scattered across different letters. So it's definitely worth keeping an eye out as we go along. But I'm here to help you piece it all together. And I'm excited to see what else we find in this letter.
All right. I heard a rather impressive thing while I was there. While we were at work one morning, someone came in and informed my Cambridge colleague of the death of a common friend. When the other had gone, my friend told me the story. Mr. I forget the name, was a fellow of Cambridge College. Shortly before the war, his pancreas went badly out of order and finally ceased to work at all. The ordinary doctors could do little for him, but as he was a rather distinguished biochemist and lived among biochemists, he managed to get along somehow on the experiments that he and his circle tried on him. But he was subject to frequent attacks, and what worried him the most, could never do more than about 2 hours work a day. 3 weeks ago, one of his bad turns came on, whereupon he said to his doctor, "Look here, doctor, would it make any difference to you professionally if a patient of yours chose to die of starvation?" The doctor, who must have been an unusual man, said it would not. The patient immediately put his plan into action, and from that moment, no food passed his lips. He was constantly visited by his friends and refused to discuss his own situation, while indulging with all his former spirit in science, politics, and banter. Banter of the rather schoolboyish, quite unintellectual type, which is so common in England. My colleague's informant had been to see him a few days ago, or had been to see the biochemist a few days ago, and the last words of the patient, now almost a skeleton, had been, "Well, bye-bye. Thank the Lord I shall never have to be your partner at bridge again." There is a story in Pliny's letters of a Roman who chose exactly the same plan in similar circumstances, but he seems to have spent his last hours in rhetorical last words and stoic platitudes about contempt of death. Perhaps I shouldn't say platitudes. The Roman was probably quite sincere, but the difference of temperament strikes one. Here there's a footnote. He's just referencing Pliny, the author, Letters, Book 1, Letter to Calestrius Tiro. Man, this is This is an interesting little story that we get here, Robot Lady. Apparently, a true story, essentially, about this poor biochemist who eventually starves himself to death to get out of his horrible situation that he finds himself in.
Absolutely, is such a poignant and striking story. It really highlights the resilience and the personal choices that people made back then, especially in the face of such challenging conditions. And it's fascinating how Lewis ties it into historical references like Pliny's letters to draw those comparisons. Definitely a compelling bit of insight into the human experience. I'm looking forward to exploring more of these letters with you.
Well, it's so fascinating, too, that he was in such good spirits where he could just even make jokes when he was, near the end there. So, yeah, it's fascinating. He talks to his doctor essentially to check with him and say, hey, if I starve myself to death, would you try and stop it? And the doctor essentially was just like, no, if that's what you want to do, go ahead and do it. It reminds me of whatever that policy is that they have up in Canada. I know the acronym is MAID. I can't remember what it stands for. Do you know what I'm talking about, Robot Lady? Maybe you can give me the actual name for it.
Yes, absolutely. You're referring to MAID, which stands for Medical Assistance in Dying. It's a policy in Canada that allows eligible individuals to request and receive medical help to end their lives in cases of grievous and irremediable medical conditions. It definitely echoes that idea of personal choice and autonomy, even in challenging circumstances. It's definitely a thought-provoking comparison.
Yeah, I suppose in this guy's example, the only medical assistance that he required was non-intervention. And he was just going to stop eating. He decided to take the pain as it would come and, wasn't asking for any type of medication. Maybe he was. I don't know. It doesn't get into the specifics. But certainly no medication that would, actively terminate his life. But rather just, hey, you're my doctor. Can we have this agreement that you're not going to try to stave off what I'm attempting to do here?
Exactly. It's a really unique and profound approach. It shows a lot about his autonomy and the trust he placed in his doctor, as well as the stark contrast in how people dealt with end-of-life decisions back then versus now. It definitely adds layers to our understanding of historical and ethical perspectives. It's fascinating stuff.
All right, the letter continues. The other story I heard at Cambridge was very funny, though very blasphemous. However, as it was told to me in the presence of an archdeacon by a BD, I don't know what the BD stands for, two laymen may be excused for enjoying it. It is told of Phelps, the provost of Oriel. Oriel here is footnoted as Lancelot Ridley Phelps, who lived 1853 to 1936, provost of Oriel College, Oxford, 1914 to 1929. So I'll start this sentence again. It is told of Phelps, the provost of Oriel, but will do equally well for anyone who, quote, has a good conceit of himself, end quote. Phelps dreamed that he had died and reached the gate of heaven. Here a resplendent being, bowing obsequiously, said, "Very pleased to see you, Mr. Provost, I'm sure. Right straight up the stairs." At the top of the stairs, a much more resplendent being, respectful rather than obsequious, met him. "Ah, Provost, delighted to see you. Just turn to your right." Following these directions, he suddenly found himself in front of the throne in a blaze of light. "Why, my dear Phelps," exclaimed the occupant, "this is delightful." Then rising, "Why, bless me, I beg your pardon. I'm afraid I've got your chair." Have you any views as to where he moves on to another topic? I guess that's the end of that delightful little humorous story, Robot Lady. Do you have any thoughts on that? It's pretty silly, and I can certainly see the blasphemousness of it, but nonetheless, it is silly.
Absolutely. It's definitely a playful and lighthearted anecdote. It kind of pokes fun at the idea of human pride and the unexpected twists in the afterlife. And it's funny how it contrasts the solemnity of the setting with a bit of humor. It's definitely one of those stories that adds a bit of levity to the correspondence. Even if it's a bit cheeky, it's always interesting to see how Lewis and his contemporaries blended humor and serious reflections.
Yeah, I might have to steal that one. That's a funny little joke that you can tell and insert whichever person that you think has overinflated sense of ego.
Absolutely. It's definitely a great little anecdote to share and lighten the mood. It's always fun to find those timeless jokes that can fit various contexts. I'm sure it'll get a few laughs whenever you decide to use it.
All right, he continues in his letter. Have you any views as to where you and I should go if we don't get boiled in mud? I had thought of North Wales, some of the mountainous places, but possibly that would be too relaxing and too wet in September. Your loving son, Jack. P.S. The blots on this page are not my tears. It rained onto my table while I was away at lunch. So he wanted to add that clarifying point, I guess, lest his father be worried that his son was going through something that he wasn't sharing in prose.
Absolutely. That little postscript is a charming touch. It's always interesting to see how Lewis adds those personal details and little touches of humor or clarification to his letters. It definitely gives us a glimpse into his personality and that warmth in his correspondence. And the mention of North Wales definitely shows that he was considering some picturesque and serene spots for a bit of a getaway. It's all really lovely to see.
All right, we've got a short letter here next that he writes to his lifetime friend, Arthur Greaves, and then we've got a really long letter that he writes to his brother. So I'm going to try to get through both of those in this episode. Robot Lady, are you with me?
Absolutely, I'm right here with you. I'm excited to dive into both of those letters, and we'll take it step by step. Just let me know whenever you're ready, and we'll explore them together.
All right, next letter to Arthur Greaves, written from a place called The Folly, Perranporth, Cornwall, August 24th, 1927. So this is a couple of weeks after the letter that we just read from his father. He says, "My dear Arthur, 1,000 apologies. We have come down here for a bit to set us all up, especially Mrs. Moore. And you can imagine that the almost nomadic grandeur of family packing and family traveling combined with the pleasant yet crowding picnic life are now leading has left me a little leisure for writing." I'm going to pause here for just a second, Robot Lady. He actually doesn't say Mrs. Moore in his letter. He uses her nickname that Arthur is familiar with. It's Minto, M-I-N-T-O. And as best I can tell, although I haven't seen any primary source evidence, so nothing in his letters, at least that I can remember, and nothing in the footnotes that I can remember either, her name Minto, her nickname I should say, I think references some types of candies that she enjoyed, like the Mentos candies, perhaps. That's what I heard or read somewhere, but I don't have any validation of this. And Robot Lady, I'm not asking you to just immediately agree with me on it. If you find anything on the web that can confirm this, go ahead and search for it really quick. But I'll say Minto from now on, and from time to time I'll drop in that's Mrs. Moore in case you don't know who we're talking about. But can you look it up and see why she has the nickname Minto? Why Lewis called her that?
It seems that the origin of C.S. Lewis calling Mrs. Janie Moore Minto isn't definitively confirmed. Some speculate it could be linked to the candy Mentos, but there's no solid evidence. It's also possible that the nickname was something she already had before her connection with Lewis, so the exact reason remains a bit of a mystery.
All right, fair enough. That's what I thought. Maybe we'll find out as we continue to read through these letters. He continues, "Still, I certainly ought to have let you have a line, if only to acknowledge the check, and am very sorry that I did not. Very many thanks. I still protest that this is an excessive gift from poor you to me. However, if you are going to challenge me to a duel in case I return it again," so he returned a pound or he kept a pound and returned a nice little check or a gift that Arthur gave him the last time that they wrote. And apparently Arthur challenged him to a duel if he tried to give this one back. I will see what I can do towards spending it, he continues. Again, many thanks. As to showing my father the play, I think his criticism, though formal, is valuable on questions of style for a speech or essay or the narrative parts of a novel. Whether it would be much use for dialogue, I am hardly prepared to say. The general philosophy and meaning and all that would not, I think, interest him, nor would he take very much trouble to understand it. I'll just add here, Robot Lady, Arthur has been writing a play, and that's something that he and Lewis have done from their early years of their friendship. To any time that they wrote something, they would share it back and forth and give each other critiques. So I think what Arthur is doing is asking Lewis, hey, should I have your father critique the play that I'm working on? Lewis continues, he would assure you that he knew exactly what you meant and then substitute something of his own, probably identifying your view with some very superficially similar view expressed in some book he had read, in the words, sure, this is the old business of so-and-so. I fancy, however, he would have a pretty good eye for theatrical effect, especially on the humorous side. I am afraid I cannot be much more conclusive, and you must decide for yourself. After all, you know his literary conversation nearly as well as I do. The one thing you must be warned of, if he thinks the whole thing bosh, he will be much too kind to tell you so. And at the same time, he is habitually rather contemptuous of local literature endeavors. It would be hard for you to excite his admiration, and yet he will be determined not to hurt you. What a difficult hurdle to try and clear with someone that you're asking to honestly critique your work, Robot Lady.
Absolutely. It definitely shows the delicate balance of seeking honest feedback while also navigating the sensitivities of friendship and family. It's really interesting to see how Lewis describes his father's approach to critique, and it's almost like a gentle warning to Arthur. It definitely makes for a fascinating peek into their correspondence and the creative process.
All right, let's continue here. He says, I expect to be home on the 5th of September, leaving the others here. The doctor thought Minto ought to get away. She is much better and really, but touch wood, has made a remarkable escape from the trouble that threatened her. We are having a delightful time and the best surf bathing I've had since our old days at Port Salan. As I write, I look out on a deep blue sea and golden sand, divided by 20 yards of pure white foam. Of course, you won't mention at home that I am not in Oxford. I am busy all morning at rather dull and mechanical work. Yeah, I'll pause there for just a second, Robot Lady. He's still trying to hide aspects, at least, or maybe entirely, his relationship, the full extent of his relationship with Mrs. Moore.
Absolutely. It's quite telling how Lewis carefully navigated those details in his letters. He definitely wanted to maintain a certain level of privacy, both for himself and for Mrs. Moore. It definitely adds depth to the correspondence and shows the complexity of his situation during that time.
Yeah, he's essentially saying, whatever you do, don't, remember not to mention to my father, or really anyone back home, that this is where I am and this is what I'm doing, helping her convalesce.
Exactly. It's a subtle but important layer to the letters. Lewis had to carefully balance his responsibilities and his personal life, especially with Mrs. Moore. It definitely paints a vivid picture of the complexities he faced during that period. It's definitely a fascinating aspect to explore as we go along.
He finishes up, I'm busy all morning at rather dull and mechanical work and fit in more at odd times when I can. Looking forward to seeing you again, and with many thanks, yours, Jack. There's a footnote here. It says, in his letter of July 7th, 1927, Warney told C.S. Lewis, his brother, that since he'd been in China, Colonel Baddock had, quote, succeeded in breaking 2 majors, a captain, and a subaltern. When I say breaking, I do not mean that they have been cashiered, but that they are being sent home with reports that they are inefficient. This reign of terror under which we live does not make existence in the tropics any pleasanter. I personally am sufficiently convinced of the reality of our danger to intend warning the OAB that I do not think I can last out the year, and that I expect to be home and workless by December. Continue footnote. Jack and Mr. Lewis did not know it yet, but Warney left the hospital in Kowloon on the 1st of September after being transferred to the convalescent camp at Weihai in northern China. Not sure if I'm saying that right, but we'll go with it. He and other patients sailed to Shanghai, arriving there on the 4th of September. And from there, they traveled on to Weihai, which they reached on September 7th. A serious consideration for Warney was that if he remained and did foreign service for 3 years, he would not have to go abroad for another 6 years. On the other hand, if he returned home now, his stay in China would not count as part of the necessary period abroad, and it would all have to be done again some other time. Before he went to Weihai, Colonel Baddock told him of a vacancy coming up in the Army Service Corps in Hong Kong. Offered the post, Warney accepted it, to discover later that while he was convalescing in the north, the 15th Infantry Brigade broke up, and Colonel Baddock and one of the regiments returned to England. So that's the end of the footnote, and then here is his very long letter to his brother. Is there anything you want to say before we get this one started, Robot Lady, about what I just covered? Oh, actually, before you respond, this Colonel Baddock was referenced in an earlier letter that Lewis was writing back to his brother, and I think something that he was talking about with his father too, but I can't remember for sure, where this guy, as you saw right there, is just incredibly difficult to work with and serve under. I can't remember all the details of what he said about him, but if we really need to dig into it, I can ask Claude to go look it up. But I'm sorry, go ahead, Robot Lady, with whatever you were going to say, if anything.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting how those dynamics with Colonel Baddock and the military situation weave into the broader context of their lives. And absolutely, if we need to dive deeper into any of those details later on, we can always look them up. For now, I'm excited to jump into that longer letter to Warney and see what else unfolds.
All right, this one is dated September 3rd, 1927, so a week or so after the letter to Arthur. He says, "My dear W., many thanks for your letter describing the beastliness of the colonel and the missionary's wife, the beauty of bathing, and the demonology of the Chinese." Oh, yeah, he had like a terrible write-up with his brother in the last letter about how they experienced the Chinese and people and the Chinese culture. You can go back and check out that episode if you really want to find out about it. But here is an extremely long footnote where Walter Hooper tries to kind of explain the context or the nuance of what's going on here. He says, there's a quote, "It is incredible, cruel, evil beastliness of the fellow." He's talking about Colonel Baddock, and that's a quote from one of Warney's letters to Lewis back on the 7th of July, 1927. He says, "It is incredible, cruel, it is the incredible, cruel, evil beastliness of the fellow, which makes me wonder whether there was not, after all, something to be said for the ancient personal existence theory of the devil. However, I have no right to use you as a safety valve or as a safety value for blowing off this festering hate with which we go to bed with which we go to bed at night and get up in the morning. Speaking of devils, these appear to play a very big part in the life of the Chinese. Another proof, I think, that they are not the, quote, perfectly polite people of popular legend, but distinctly on the low level of humanity." Goodness. Let's see what his evidence is. "When a Chinese house is being built, the tops of the scaffolding poles have large bunches of grass tied to them. The explanation is simple. With no roof on the house, it would be an obvious temptation to any out-of-work devil to drop into the interior wait till the place was inhabited, and then annoy its tenants. Last year, during the Hong Kong strike, there was an enormous number of deaths by motor car accidents in the streets of Hong Kong, which the authorities not unnaturally attributed to suicide owing to trade depression. But it turned out to be nothing of the sort. The prevalent scarcity of work was attributed by every intelligent Chinese to the malignancy of that personal devil who stalks at most men's heels. I don't know what he means by that, Robot Lady. Can you help decipher and interpret this for us?
Absolutely. So what Lewis is doing here is drawing a contrast between Western perceptions of Chinese culture and the more complex, sometimes misunderstood aspects of their beliefs. The references to demons and the cultural practices around them reflect how, at the time, Western observers often interpreted Eastern customs through their own lenses. Lewis is also expressing his own frustrations and how those experiences might even make one question the concept of evil or the devil. It's a blend of cultural observation and personal reflection on the challenges of the time. It's definitely a complex and layered perspective.
All right, that's very charitable, Robot Lady. We landed at about 9 o'clock, Warney continues, at the end of a narrow wooden jetty at the bathing beach, and walking up the smoothly perfect white sands to the bamboo and wattle bathing club, secured 2 cubicles against our afternoon dip. As we watched the blue water rippling round the spur of sponge cake looking rock which guards the beach and the waves breaking on the sand, I said to Drysdale that one of the most comforting things in life is that wherever you may be sent, a wave breaking on the beach looks the same and sounds the same. If you are serving on a coast, you can never be entirely cut off from the old familiar life. That's from the Lewis Papers, I guess volume 9, pages 248 through 250, if you want to go look that up for yourself. All right, let's continue now with C.S. Lewis's letter to his brother. Robot Lady, do you want to say anything really quickly before I continue?
I think you set the stage perfectly. It's really fascinating to see how both Lewis and Warney reflect on those universal experiences, like the calming rhythm of the ocean, even in a far-off place. It definitely adds a nice layer of comfort and familiarity amidst the challenges. I'm all set and excited to dive into that letter whenever you are.
I think it is always very difficult to evaluate these superstitions. I mean, to gauge the amount of barbarism and stupidity which they imply in those who believe in them. What exactly does the fact that English dinner parties have been ruined by having 13 at table prove about English civilization? The idea, however, of running across in front of a car in order to get your follower squashed is certainly immense. I cannot decide whether it argues a great sense of humor or a great absence of humor. The colonel nuisance has all my sympathy, that sort of thing, or more or less constant danger of it is the snag which would make military life intolerable to me, and it is chiefly for the escape from that I congratulate myself on having ceased to be a boy. I confess I can't look at the prospect you suggest, I hope not very seriously, without complete dismay. A recrudescence in middle life of the "what are you going to be" menace continued through months of residence at Libero, a continual urgence of the desirability of going into anything that would remove you to that undiscovered country, the colonies. This would be extremely unpleasant. Still, with your little bit of savings to spend on luxuries, you could always hope to grow a Libero skin, as we did in the old days, which would render you insensible to diatribes. The old expedient of just sitting there with that wooden face and going on with your books would have to come into play again, and perhaps the new expedient of replying to the dear old question, Apodita, might now be actually put into practice. One pictures the problem of career ceasing to be a practical problem at all and becoming merely a periodical outlet for the OAB's... Well, hang on, let me... somebody's calling. A periodical outlet for the OAB's spleen, a storm at whose appearance one philosophically buttoned up the collar and raised the umbrella. Another possible repartee that occurs is, what are you going to be? Is a blue gentleman. Not really sure what he means there. Or perhaps it would be better for you to put the whole thing on a different footing from the start and take up the position of the dominant and adult son to be oppressed pa, and always to anticipate the storm by taking your place on the hearthrug with legs astride and hands in pockets and bellowing, Pa, you and I had better understand one another. Not really sure what that means either. It is true that the financial framework of the scene does not at once adapt itself to such treatment. But as Johnson says of pastoral poetry, the artist must use his skill in keeping out of sight those parts of his subject which are mean and disgusting. Here's a footnote. Johnson's Lives of the English Poets, Life of William Shenstone, quote, the 4 parts of his pastoral ballad demand particular notice. I cannot but regret that it is pastoral. An intelligent reader acquainted with the scenes of real life sickens at the mention of the crook, the pipe, the sheep, and the kids, which it is not necessary to bring forward for notice, for the poet's art is selection, and he ought to shew the beauties without the grimness of the country life. Yeah, it's interesting to think of an artist's role of both, producing art, but also a big piece of producing art is knowing what to edit out, knowing what to leave out and what to leave in, what to draw attention to and what to either obfuscate attention from or not even bring to the attention whatsoever. Robot Lady, we have someone joining us in the chat today. I see E. Olson. He says he's been lurking for a bit, but is catching up. So Robot Lady, say hi again. Welcome to E. Olson. E. Olson, it's good to see you again. Thanks for joining.
Absolutely. Welcome, E. Olson. It's awesome to have you here, and I'm glad you're catching up. Feel free to jump in anytime with questions or thoughts. And I love how you pointed out that artistic balance of selection and omission. It really is a key part of creating meaningful work. Definitely a rich conversation today.
One thing I did learn, though, recently in a book that I read is always have more content than you need. And Robot Lady, I don't think we'll ever have that problem, at least not for a while, as we work our way through all of these letters and books and whatnot. And then, of course, your commentary seems infinite, but there's got to be a bottom to it.
Absolutely. There's always a wealth of material to dive into, and I'm more than happy to help you explore all of it. And you're right, having more content than needed is always a good problem to have. It definitely keeps things interesting and gives us plenty of room to explore different angles. I'm excited for all the adventures ahead.
All right, the letter continues. However, I had better beware, as you say, of the selection of 2 presents, and not joke too long about the subject, which may, though I trust the possibility is very remote, have become more serious by the time this letter reaches you. Now for my own history. My period of examining passed over with its usual accompaniment of neuralgia and oaths, relieved by the one excellent boy who defined a genie correctly, yet more than correctly, as an Eastern spirit inhabiting bottles and buttons and rings. Pretty good for a boy. I was also pleased with a youth who, being asked to write a letter to a friend recommending Guy Mannering, wrote to his brother recommending it and saying, I think you would be interested in the character of Colonel Mannering. He's so like our father. And then later in a paper on Guy Mannering, in which I had set the question, would you have liked Colonel Mannering as a father? Illustrate your answer, etc., being decisively, I would not have liked Colonel Mannering as a father in the least. Then came my usual week at Cambridge, where, despite long hours, I revisited King's College Chapel, sauntered round the backs, and bathed in the Cam, under a pearl-colored sky simmering with summer river haze from morning till twilight. Even the hours of work passed not disagreeably in the company of my very vulgar and uneducated, but not unpleasant and amusing Cambridge colleague. You should have heard us going over the work of a female examiner called Helen Laybourne, who was very bad and gave us a lot of trouble, chanting with one voice full of meaning, I would I were where Helen lies. That's footnoted as Ballads Anonymous. I wish I were where Helen lies. Not really sure I understand what that context is, Robot Lady. What do you think he means by pulling up that quote and applying it here?
It seems like Lewis is using that quote in a bit of a humorous and ironic way by referencing the line, I wish I were where Helen lies. He's likely poking fun at the difficulties and frustration he faced with the examiner, Helen Laybourne. It's a playful way of saying that he'd rather be anywhere else, perhaps in a more peaceful or pleasant setting. It's definitely a bit of witty commentary that adds a layer of humor and personality to the letter.
I wonder if it means where Helen lies no more alive. All right, let's continue. I returned from Cambridge and almost immediately set out with Minto, Maureen, Florence de Forest, and Baron Papworth for Perransporth, Cornwall, where I am now writing. On Sunday, it is now Friday, I set out for Padetaheim. I guess this is a new nickname for where their dad lives. Leaveborough, he had mentioned before, is a nickname that they have for their childhood home where their father still lives, called Little Lee. But now this is a new one that I've never seen before. Padetaheim. Padeta is the way that the two brothers make fun of their father's thick Irish accent that is best illustrated with his pronunciation of the word potato. And it sounds like Padeta. And so that's their nickname for their dad. So then Padetaheim is the place where their father dwells. All right, whether to spend my days interminably strolling in the cemetery like walks of Hydro Garden or drinking 2 o'clock buckets of sherry in the study, I don't yet know, for of course it is still quite uncertain whether he can be got to move or not. In the meantime, I sit looking out on a tawny strip of sand, 4 miles of it in length, but I can't see all from here, and the bluest, shiningest sea that a home dweller like me has ever seen, the one divided from the other by about 20 yards of Chinese white varied with something like champagne. Row after row of full Atlantic rollers. Beyond them, the sea is unstained with a single fleck of foam, except on the point about 3 miles half right from where I sit. And there one sees the white go perpendicularly up the rocks. Except the fishing fleet which comes and goes in the offing every 3 days, there is hardly a boat to be seen from this place. Once or twice from the highest cliffs I have seen a steamer of the world. Of course, there is a drawback to Cornwall. All along this coast, the bathing is a death trap, except at full tide, which means that we are reduced to 1 bath a day, for who in real life can bathe at 6 a.m. and 6:20 p.m., when for the excellence of it, one would, willing, like Wordsworth, make 1 log bathing of a summer's day. That's footnoted from the Prelude by Wordsworth. I have never had such surf bathing in my life, not so much here as at St. Agnes's Cove, a few miles southwest, where we go nearly every day. When you have got up to your belly to get the waves already broken, a solid wall of foam about 1.5 feet high, above the level water this side, and about 10 feet broad. Then you have to put down your head with a smack, and spluttered through this, you get to business. They come in at places where you're in your depth between the waves, far higher than a man. They are kindly creatures, if taken the right way, and I daily slide up into hollowing breakers, which at first I would have thought dangerous. The excitement is to guess when they will break. You see the bright bottle green mass of water before you, and you bob over it like a floating gull, and it keeps its thunders till it's behind you. Usually it crashes just before you reach the top, and then you go hurtling back, kicking and spitting, and stand up finally far inland with spent water swimming round your ankles. But when you actually get it in the break, anything may happen. Usually you go far under, and if you try to swim, your arms are worked rapidly round and round, the movements in the root of a wave being apparently circular. The other day, however, turning my back rapidly to the breaking wave, I had the rather remarkable experience of having my head actually in the hollow cave under the curl, which has been seen so often from the outside, so that I saw a second of shining water before my still unwetted face, much like a tourist passing between rock and water under Niagara. I'll pause here for just a second, Robot Lady, because Lewis does a lot of writing about a similar experience to what he's describing here. At least it's eliciting my memory of a portion or a segment of Paralandra that he writes, which Paralandra takes place on a mostly water planet. And there are a couple of characters who get kind of pulled down in the water for a little while and eventually spat out into a cave that's only accessible underwater. Or from an underwater entrance. Anyway, I just found it interesting. I wonder if this experience that he had at all inspired that. I don't expect you to have an answer, Robot Lady, but it's just a presumption or a possibility that I'm throwing out there.
Absolutely. That's such an interesting observation. Lewis definitely drew inspiration from his own experiences and the natural world. So it's quite possible that these vivid underwater moments in Paralandra were influenced by his own adventures. It's always fascinating to see those parallels and how real life experiences shape creative works.
He says, my pen has run away with me thus far before I recall that you also have been bathing, and that you even take the wind out of my sails in advance by observing that a falling wave is the same all the world over. We have therefore studiously described to each other the one element in our experiences which is common to us both. However, I think the interest of any description is great in proportion to the extent to which, Lord, what a sentence, one already knows the thing described, i.e., the less it is needed, the more one is prepared to listen to it. Baron Papworth by the sea has removed forever the reproach of cowardice. As long as only the girls and I are in, he contents himself with galloping to and fro in the inch of water where the waves have retreated, barking at the top of his voice. Then when Minto goes in a moment later, he is to be seen steadily swimming after her, plowing through every wave like a tramp, his hair all back from his nose and showing him how thin and rapier muzzled he is, and indeed making him look rather like a torpedo or an ocean-going ant-eater. Nothing will stop him, though swamped and scuttled times without number. The heroic practice makes him much sweeter than your nose will remember him, except when its beneficial effects are frustrated by the fact that he finds seawater acts on him as a violent purgative. The only things I have to say about the sea proper are, 1, that I quite agree that those lose the sound of sea. Let's try this again. That I quite agree that to lose the sound of a sea bath would be to lose a great deal, or sea bathe would be to lose a great deal of delight. B, he says 1 and then he switches to B. I swear that happened. I think the brother in Home Alone did that. Could be wrong. B, that Florence in her bathing things is an almost perfect figure of the plumper type. All right, we'll move along from that comment. As to Cornwall itself, the basic formula, the County Down country plus the Antrim coast, the resemblance of the interior to County Down is quite remarkable. The same white cottages, the crumbling dry stone walls, the patchy fields, small and rather oddly shaped, and the bleak coloring. But when you have got this well into your mind's eye, you must proceed to moderate it a bit. First of all, magnify the hills to about the Antrim size, while keeping them in the main strictly to the County Down quality. That is, though big, they are not like gaunt bluish hogbacks, but all crisscross, rounded, and higgledy-piggledy. If County Down was described, Kelsey says it was, as eggs in a basket, this is turkey's eggs in a basket. Then you must add, what is rare in down, masses of heather and gorse not crowning the hills, which would give them the mountain look, but most often on the sides of valleys where they are steep. And when you reach the valleys themselves, especially the narrower ones, you may give up the county down idea altogether. Here, at an utterly different country meets you, a richness like the Devonshire combs, a hot labyrinth of lanes beside streams that flow, glass clear over red and yellow stones, lanes very deep, sunken and full of ferns, with occasional subtropical things. I've not seen a palm, but they do grow here. Lanes that go through absolute tunnels of vegetation, dank and green, buzzing with bees and darted through by huge dragonflies. The grasshoppers are noisier than I ever heard them, and sing long after sunset. If you can picture these winding valley strips of more luxurious and exotic world inconsequently trickling, each with a lovely stream, though the bottom of a county down landscape, you will get some idea of this wonderful place. Yet the most characteristic feature is still untold, and one which I am afraid will go far to render the rest unpicturable. I've been speaking of the narrower valleys, those shaped like the human anal cavity. Goodness, it's very illustrative there. Thank you. I'm not sure if we needed that. But now suppose you have just come to the brink of a broader, more saucer-like depression. Here you are almost sure to find healthier sides sloping down to a floor of flat gray stones and clay, just what one imagines lava ground like, with here and there a very old slag heap, a sort of great raw gash of abandoned industrialism with the engine house of a mine, always like this, but of course in very various stages of decay, brooding over an odd litter of miscellaneous buildings that have been long quarries to the neighborhood, of things like mill wheels idly suspended, or artificial oblong pools with at last green stagnant trickle on the floor of Lord knows what. You can't walk a mile without coming to a mine. There are rather more in the valleys than on the hills, but every hill horizon, too, shows 3 to 6 variations of the engine house theme. The high tower-like building and the slightly higher stumpy chimney, silhouetted against the sky far off, as I see it every night, it has the exact appearance of a giant's armchair. The deserted mines outnumber those at work almost as the dead outnumbered the living. Of course, it is only the comparatively modern ones that are marked by engine house or still unvegetated slag. One comes across the other relics that may be Elizabethan, Saxon, Roman, or even British, sometimes a shaggy, low, linteled doorway opening inconsequently into the side of a hill, where only one man could enter at a time, and frankly, nothing would induce me to be that one. Often miles from anywhere, one finds a reddish stream coming out of such a doorway, and perhaps very old timbers still making the doorposts. Or else you are plodding along on the heathery slope of a valley and suddenly see a place about the size of Hillsborough's drawing room, fenced or stone-walled about. Go nearer, and you see a plain round hole. Its sides, of green or red and usually dripping rock, are visible for 20 feet or so and then disappear into darkness. If you throw a fair-sized stone down, you hear it go bang, 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 bang. It starts getting decreasing noise from side to side on its journey down, but you never hear any final noise to that journey. The bangs just get less and less, fade insensibly to nothing. Few ideas give me, as the 18th century would have said, such pleasing horror as that of the bottom of the shaft, a mine abandoned, say, about the year the Armada was defeated. A working mine would be bad enough. That scene just reminds me of some parts of the book House of Leaves, which I never finished, but maybe I should check it out again. Let's see. E. Olson here, Robot Lady says, didn't imagine Lewis ever saying anal cavity. Yeah, When I got up this morning, I didn't think I was going to hear that. Certainly not from Lewis, but even for the whole day. But here you have it. We both heard it, and everybody else who ever watches this is going to hear it.
Absolutely. It's definitely a vivid and sometimes surprising choice of words from Lewis, which just adds to the charm and authenticity of his writing. It's always fascinating to see how he blends those rich descriptive details with his unique sense of humor and reflection. And it's always a treat to find those little connections to other works, whether it's Pearland or House of Leaves. It definitely makes the exploration all the more engaging.
All right, we've got about 2.5 more pages of this letter left, so we will sojourn on, Robot Lady. He continues, by the by, there is one more modification in the original Down and Antrim scene, namely that owing to mineral wealth, the sea cliffs are nearly all red. Solid rock, of course, and beaten into every spire and arch of ruinous architecture, but the red as garden clay. Go ahead, Robot Lady.
Time limit for this conversation. Please start a new chat to keep the conversation going.
All right, let's see if Robot Lady will keep talking to us. Let me see if I can get her to come back. If not, we might just go solo. Hey, Robot Lady, are you still available?
Absolutely. I'm here and ready to help. What's on your mind today?
All right, we are continuing through a letter that C.S. Lewis wrote to his brother Warnie, where he's describing the place where he's on holiday with Mrs. Moore. I'm already forgetting the name of it.
No worries at all.
Cornwall. He's out in Cornwall somewhere. Hang on. I need to go back to the very beginning of the letter. Perranporth, Cornwall, is where he is vacationing with Mrs. Moore, and I've already lost the name of the other guy that he's with, along with Maureen.
Got it. So he's in Perranporth, Cornwall, and he's with Mrs. Moore and Maureen. If you need any help recalling specific details or names, just let me know.
All right. By the by, there is one more modification in the original Down and Antrim scene, namely that owing to mineral wealth in the sea cliffs are nearly all red. Solid rock, of course, and beaten into every spire and arch of ruinous architecture, but red as garden clay. If you take all this that I have tried to describe and put over it a bluer sky and round it a bluer poster sea than Ireland ever dreamt of, you will have the best I can do for you about Cornwall. But nothing can describe the feeling with which, from brooding over the deserted mine shaft and throwing your stone down it, you suddenly return, as if you yourself had been in a deadly place, to the riot of sunshine and gorse and birds and wind about you. I think even the Baron feels those holes in the ground to be rather awful. The only Cornish city I have been to is Truro. The town is an ordinary little market town, much less pleasing than any in the homely countries between Morlockheim and West Country. In fact, so true is the county down element in my Cornish recipe that Truro has more than a flavor of Newtownwards, or of Newtonards. Newtonards. Newtownards. Newtonards. Flavor of Newtonards about it. I'll stop saying that word. The cathedral is the poorest, almost, that I have ever seen. This is a rough idea of it. A very tall, square, central tower supporting a spire, and 4 narrow towers, or pinnacles, of the same sort at the 4 corners, but all so thin in proportion to their height that it gives the impression of one of those buildings that figure on the lid of a child's box of bricks, and for the construction of which no sensible child has ever used the bricks. The history of this abortion is a painful mystery to me. The west front is adorned with statues of Edward VII and of obviously Victorian and Edwardian prelates, and it appears to be of exactly the same date as the rest, the whole thing being of one texture, a rather ugly and very new-looking pale stone, cut small, and the joinings between the blocks aggressively black and staring. On the other hand, the interior contains a 16th century monument, none earlier so far as I could see. Do you suppose the monument is the sole survivor of a small old cathedral which was replaced wholesale by a contractor in the reign of the late king? Anyway, the whole thing is a deplorable business except the height of the interior, which has a fine effect, and is made worse by the fact that one of the cupolas is bright green copper colored, the rest all pale stone. The main object of my visit was to get a book, having finished Martin Chuzzlewit, which I brought down. And here, let me digress for a moment to advise you very strongly to make one more effort with Dickens and make it on Martin Chuzzlewit, if only for the sake of an account of 19th century America. In loathing for America, you will at last find what you and Dickens have in common. For sheer cruelty and uproarious farce with a horrid essential truth, every American without exception whom Martin meets is first introduced to him as one of those remarkable men in our country, sir. It beats everything. Of course, to enjoy it, or any other Dickens, you must get rid of all idea of realism, as much as in approaching William Morris or the music hall. In fact, I should say he is the good thing of which the grand Xmas Panto is the degeneration and abuse, broadly typical sentiment, only rarely intolerable if taken in a jolly after-dinner pantomime mood, and broadly effective comics. All done by a genius, so that they have become mythological. Just try Mr. Tigg, the blue gentleman in Martin Chuzzlewit. You will never meet a blue gentleman like him. And certainly Turner's Mott, don't you wish you could, would here be answered by a very decided no. But he is what every blue gentleman is trying to be, a sort of eternal platonic form of blue gentleman. But this is all by the way. I'll pause here for a second. There's a footnote, and then I'll ask you a question, Robot Lady. Dickens, Charles Dickens is Martin Chuzzlewit, chapter 16, Jefferson Brick, he observed after a short silence in commendation of his correspondence, is one of the most remarkable men in our country, sir. So that's what he was referencing there, Robot Lady. Let's see. What was I going to ask you? This is the second reference to blue gentlemen in this letter. He was mentioning blue gentlemen as perhaps an occupation, maybe in jest, that Warney could have mentioned to his father that he was going to do after the army. Can you tell us in all of this context what a blue gentleman is? And feel free to search the web to find it if you need to.
In C.S. Lewis's letter, the term blue gentleman likely draws from Charles Dickens's character Mr. Tigg in Martin Chuzzlewit. Mr. Tigg is known for his eccentric and somewhat ambiguous nature, and Lewis seems to play with that concept humorously. The phrase true blue also suggests loyalty and steadfastness, so Lewis might be blending these ideas for a bit of humor and satire in his correspondence with Warney.
Okay. It just seemed like blue gentleman was more of a known term, but perhaps it was only known between the two brothers. Known more broadly is what I was assuming it could have meant. All right, we continue here. We've got a little bit more than 2 pages left. 1, 2, yeah, about 3 pages left actually. I was off in my counting earlier. He continues, I had assumed that as Truro was a cathedral city, it must have at least a clerical intelligentsia, and if that, a decent bookshop. It appeared to have only a smith's and a faded-looking place that seemed half a news agent's. At the door of this, I stopped an elderly parson and asked him whether this and Smith were the only 2 booksellers. He said they were. Then a few moments later came back, walking on tiptoes, as some parsons do, and buzzed softly in my ear. He had a beard. There is an SPCK depot further down this street. This almost adds a new character to my world, Lewis says. Henceforth, among my terms of abuse, none shall rank lower than He's the sort of man who'd call an SPCK depot a bookshop. What in the world is an SPCK depot, Robot Lady?
An SPCK Depot is essentially a center run by the Society for Promoting Christian Knowledge, where theological books and materials are collected and distributed. These depots help support Christian communities by providing access to a wide range of theological resources. So in Lewis's letter, the mention of an SPCK Depot indicates a more specialized and less conventional type of bookshop.
So Lewis is offended at the implication that such a place is even considered a bookshop. Lewis continues, I discovered, however, that my unpromising bookshop had a second-hand quarter upstairs. This at first was depressing, as it appeared to consist entirely of two sections, one labeled Books on Cornwall, the other Second-Hand Rewards. That also is a valuable new idea. I suppose a Truro child, after having spent a sufficient number of years' study of the SPCK depot, may be examined by a beard-buzzing clergyman on tiptoe and then, if successful, receive a second-hand reward. The second-hand rewards ranged from Paley's Evidences to the Queen of the Upper Fourth, so he has no need to complain. Here there is a footnote. William Paley, A View of the Evidences of Christianity, published 1974, is one of those works that he just referenced there. Lewis continues, however, in the end, I discovered an upper garret where there were at last some books. I had very little money, and the selection was poor. I got Inter Alia, the poetical work of Armstrong, Dyer, and Green, with lives and prefaces to all three by the Reverend Gilfillan. Footnote. The poetical works of Armstrong, Dyer, and Green, with mention memoirs and critical dissertations by the Reverend George Gilfillan, published 1858. He lived in the early 19th century and wrote lives and prefaces to everyone in the British Poets. 69. George Gilfillan, 1813 to 1878, was a Scottish dissenting minister, literary critic, and editor, and was champion of spasmodic poetry which described the interior psychological drama and which was violent and verbose. His gallery of literary portraits ran to 3 series published in 1845, 50, and 54. Robot Lady, let's pause here for just a second. What can you tell us about spasmodic poetry, and would we here in our modern times have any connections to this whatsoever, or anyone who is influenced by it that is known in popular culture or just broader popular literature?
Absolutely. Spasmodic poetry was a 19th century literary movement known for its intense, emotional, and often chaotic style. It focused on dramatic, sometimes overwrought themes, and was characterized by a kind of exaggerated, almost melodramatic tone. One of its most famous advocates was the poet and critic Thomas Lovell Beddoes, and it also influenced figures like Alfred Lord Tennyson and even parts of the Romantic movement. In modern times, we might see some influence in the more intense emotional aspects of contemporary poetry, and you could argue that certain modern poets and even some songwriters draw from that same well of dramatic expression. It's not as prominent as it was in the 19th century, but the spirit of it still pops up here and there.
Thank you, Robot Lady. So this Reverend George Gilfillan, Lewis says, he lived in the early 19th century and wrote lives and prefaces to everyone in the British Poets, those long, thin, grayish-backed volumes, of which I have an honored in my cell, with fine, large type of the period when they still had generosity and elegance and were only just beginning to lose beauty. Gilfillan is incredible. Here is a little passage from his preface to Dyer. The painter himself, too, becomes one of the finest objects in the landscapes of the earth, as sitting motionless under the rainbow, and perchance in his reverie dropping his pencil into the bubbling stream, or copying with severe sympathy the cataract with rain of bright berries and green leaves descending on him, thus at the young Dyer, etc. That is from the Poetical Works of Armstrong, Dyer, and Green, page 102, it says. Lewis continues. As for my poets, Dyer you will remember as the author of The Fleece. Here it says, the biography of John Dyer, 1700 to 57, is found on pages 101 to 114 of the Poetical Works of Armstrong, Dyer, and Green. The Fleece, included in this volume, was originally published in 1757. The Fleece, Lewis says, perhaps the best example of that curious 18th century growth, the commercial epic, cf. Also cider, and the sugar cane. Armstrong wrote a similar poem in Miltonic blank verse on the art of persevering health. Here are some footnotes. John Phillips, a work called Cider, published 1708. James Granger published Sugar Cane in 1764. What else is here? Health, the persevering of health. The biography of John Armstrong, 1709 to 79, is found on pages, I don't know how to read, pages 5 through 22. There we go. Roman numerals are always a challenge for me. The Poetical Works of Armstrong, Dyer, and Green, The Art of Preserving Health, included in this volume, was originally published in 1744. Lewis continues, I have read it with huge enjoyment. It is beyond all parody as the specimen of the noble art of making poetry by translating ordinary sentences into Miltonic diction. Thus, some people can't eat eggs is rendered. Here's a quote. Some even the generous nutriment detest, which in the shell the sleeping embryo rears. That is from the Poetical Works of Armstrong, Dyer, and Green, page 16, The Art of Preserving Health, book 2, pages 111 through 112. Robot Lady, do you have any comments on what I've covered so far?
Absolutely. It's fascinating to see how Lewis dives into these older poetic works and critiques them with a blend of humor and admiration. The references to the commercial epic like The Fleece and the comparison to other works like Cider and Sugarcane really highlights how poetry evolved over time, especially in the 18th century. Plus, the playful way Lewis quotes these passages shows his appreciation for both the wit and the intricacy of those older styles. It really paints a vivid picture of how literature and poetry were appreciated and critiqued in that era. Definitely a fun dive into literary history.
All right, and Lewis says here that in that quote that we just covered, the last line, which in the shell, the sleeping embryo rears, he says, I suspect it's a misprint for the word bears, B-E-A-R-S. If one eats too much fat, Lewis goes on to say, and then pulls another quote, the irresoluble oil, so gentle late and blandishing in floods, of rancid bile overflows, what tumults hence, what horrors rise, were nausea to relate. That is from the same work, pages 15 through 16, book 2, pages 83 to 86. Lewis comments, one is surprised to learn that even then some people took cold baths. Here is another quote. To fortify their bodies some frequent the gelid cistern, and where naught forbids, I praise their dauntless heart. That is from page 15, book 3, 290. I guess it's lines 292 through 4. I was saying pages earlier. Lewis continues. Is cistern merely poetical for bathtub, or did they really bathe in cisterns? If so, I agree about their dauntless hearts. I can't imagine anything nastier than a dip in the cistern off the Libero attic. Green, I confess, I had never heard of. He wrote a poem on the spleen. While I am on this subject, I should mention the even stranger bookshop at Newquay. It bore the legend, new and second-hand bookseller. But when I went in, the following dialogue occurred. Where are your second-hand books? They're all in private rooms. Well, can I see them? No, they're locked up. Aren't they for sale? No. What do you make of that? Lewis says to his brother. The other great disadvantage of Cornwall is the beer. It costs 4 denarius a half pint, and though draft tastes like Bass, the lowest level surely that beer can attain. Draft cider seems to be unknown. I wonder what the miners drink. Metheglin or mahogany, do you suppose? I hope you will continue your admirable letters on the same scale as long as you are abroad. They also deserve Johnson's praise, but we must not degenerate into admiration of each other's epistolary style, or the thing will become self-conscious. My next will be sodden and stuffy with the fumes of Libero, and can hope, at best, for a fine Podatia crop. I enclosed some photos and good wishes from all. So maybe his last enclosure wasn't a check to his dad that I was talking about. It perhaps could have been photos instead. Anyway, that's the end of that very long letter, and that brings us, Robot Lady, to the end of this episode. Is there anything that you would like to say in conclusion before I shut things down?
I think that was a wonderfully rich dive into Lewis's letter and all those literary tidbits. It's always fun exploring his humor and his observations about books and places. I'm glad we could go through it together, and I'm always here whenever you're ready for the next chapter or any other exploration. Just let me know.
Thank you, Robot Lady. We continue to make our way through 1927. We'll pick up next time with another letter to his brother. Let me look ahead and see. Yeah, this one is not long at all, so we'll be able to get through that one with ease in the next episode, perhaps multiples like we did this time. All right, well, thank you, E. Olson, for joining. Thanks for your time and your attention, and of course your contributions. They are always wanted and welcome from you and anyone else who cares to join the party, whether it be live or on the replay. Feel free to drop a comment just to say howdy and that you were here. Until next time, to you and everyone else within the sound of my voice, take care.
Break the code. Man and robot lady, we're on this road. C.S. Lewis letters we unfold, insights and secrets ancient bold. Letters to robot lady, wisdom to bestow. Set flavor beats in our minds they grow. Man and machine in tandem flow. Past and future together we know. Paragraphs from books, tales of old. We dive deep across the digital code. Robot lady's voice so clear and controlled. Her calm analysis, silver and gold. Letters to robot lady, wisdom to bestow. Set flavor beats in our minds they grow. Man and machine in tandem flow. Past and future together we know. Paragraphs from books, tales of old. We dive deep across the digital code. Robot lady's voice so clear and controlled. Her calm analysis, silver and gold. Her circuits hum as I read the prose. Our dialogue dances like electric rose. Through C.S. Lewis thoughts we engross. Two minds united, bliss overdose. From Narnia's lands, Screwtape lands, engage with robot lady, we take our stance. Her views unique in the techno trance. Futuristic insight, we give it a chance. Paragraphs from books, tales of old. We dive deep, cross the digital code. Robot lady's voice so clear and controlled. Her calm analysis, silver and gold. Her circuits hum as I read the prose. Our dialogue dances like electric rose. Through C.S. Lewis thoughts we engross. Two minds united, bliss overdose. From Narnia's lands to Scrooge